As American airman Tyler Stark floated towards the ground over Libya last year behind the spiralling wreckage of his plane, he says there was an eerie silence. It was his first ever combat mission, and now he was thinking it was going to be his last. Tyler Stark had just turned 27, which was one of the 3 facts about himself he was trained to reveal if he was captured. His name, and in spite of what the movies say, not his serial number, but his age and his rank. Tyler Stark, 27 years old, captain. Now, I want to ask you this morning to ponder for a moment, to think about the question, what are the things that define you? If it was reduced perhaps to 3 things about you. How do you describe yourself? How do you define yourself? Perhaps when you first meet someone at a party, what are the first things you will ask someone else? They'll ask about you. For most of us, it's a question very like, what do you do? That's very much like rank, isn't it? What you are. It's so keenly connected in our culture. What your work is from 9 to 5 or from 8 to 4, or for lots of you I know, from 7 a.m. on the train to 7:30 p.m. when you finally drag yourself home exhausted. It is hard, isn't it, not to be defined by words like consultant, doctor, dentist, clerk, public servant, programmer, engineer, nurse, soldier, teacher. Name, age, rank. That's who you are. What you are. Now they do say at Weight Watchers you are what you eat, but the reality is in our culture, in 21st century Australia, you really are what you do. Which is dangerous really when you think about it, because what are you then the day after you retire? What are you then the day after you're retrenched by Campbell Newman? What are you when it comes to eternity? I was talking to a guy the other day. He's been a respected eye surgeon in Sydney for 47 years. His retirement day last week turned out to be the day of his father's funeral, which is kind of doubly confronting, isn't it? He said, surgery was okay, but it gets mundane after a while. Anything does. He said, you wonder, what's the point? Which is, you remember where we left 1 Corinthians 15 last week, and where we pick it up today, the remarkable contention from the Apostle Paul that he is absolutely convinced by the example of Jesus Christ that this life is not all there is, that there is a life to come, and that he is prepared to stake everything on it, that he is every day prepared to put his body on the line, face death, because he is convinced of the resurrection of the dead by the resurrection of Jesus. And at which point he says those words at the end of chapter 15 verse 58, where we started the reading. Therefore, my brothers and sisters as well, stand firm, let nothing move you from that truth. Always give yourselves fully to the work of the Lord, because you know that your labour in the Lord is not in vain. Now you see, if you are not a Christian at this point, that sort of thing won't make any sense to you at all. But he's saying if you have been persuaded that this life is not all there is, if you have been persuaded that the Lord Jesus is the key to eternity, then don't keep living as if this life is all there is. And if you're someone who's looked at the evidence and you're convinced that Jesus has been raised from the dead, that Jesus is boss, if you've understood that our sins have been forgiven and that we've got the hope of resurrection too, then you'll understand there's work to be done. Work that's not ultimately futile, it's not ultimately in vain, and it is, as Paul calls it, the work of the Lord. And if you're a follower of Jesus, according to Paul, every one of us should be throwing ourselves into it. To not do that is absolutely inconsistent with who we are. Stand firm, he says, let nothing move you, always give yourself fully to the work of the Lord. It's a labour that's not in vain. Now, as we're going to see here in chapter 16, there are all kinds of ways you can do that. And he's not saying for a minute that you'll necessarily stop being a policeman or a dentist or an IT guy, but that your purpose in life, that your passion, that the thing you give yourself to in the way you do everything, that your life polarity changes. And that's the thread that you'll see kind of ties 1 Corinthians 16 together. At first glance, it's like one of those chapters that's just a random grab bag of Facebook messages. All the last minute things Paul hasn't got around to saying in the rest of the letter. But have a look closer and you'll see that it's full of people who show us what it looks like to do the work of the Lord. You'll see the phrase in verse 8, a great door for effective work has opened, says Paul, for me. Verse 10, Timothy is carrying on the work of the Lord as I am. Verse 15, he says, submit to Stephanas and anyone like him, everyone who joins in the work of the Lord and labours at it, make them your example. So here's a roster, here's a list here of the kind of ordinary people who are working with the Apostle Paul, front office or back office, front lines or behind the scenes, reaching, teaching and caring, doing the work of the Lord. Let's take it from the start. Something everyone is called on to do and join in. It's the collection that Paul says he's organising for God's people, which is literally the same original word there as later on in verse 15, the saints, which isn't for a moment talking about the stained glass kind of saints or the Roman Catholic kind of saints or the St. Peter and St. Paul kind of saints, as if Paul's taking up a collection for himself. It's his term most commonly, specifically, for the Jewish Christians back in Jerusalem, the original church where everything else spread from. Trouble is, when you read about those Jewish Christians in Jerusalem in other parts of the New Testament, most times they're not actually that keen on the fact that Paul is out there in places like Corinth inviting non-Jews, the Gentiles, to become Christians as well. They're very concerned about that. They are not very welcoming, the saints back in Jerusalem. At the very least, not welcoming of people who want to join in the church without becoming properly Jewish first. And now, these grumpy kind of stuck-in-the-mud Jewish Christians have hit very hard times. There is a famine in Jerusalem and they're starving. At which point, Paul is doing an incredibly gracious thing. The New Testament is just riddled with instances of the Jewish Christians in Jerusalem wanting to make things harder for Paul and the non-Jewish Christians. So what does Paul want to do? Around all his churches, around all the Gentile churches, around all the non-Jewish churches, he is organising a collection to send money by the truckload to help them out in their hour of need. There is a need, and Paul and his churches are going to fill it with love. They're going to show they care. Now about the collection for the saints, verse 1. Do what I told the Galatian churches to do. On the first day of every week, each one of you should set aside a sum of money in keeping with his income, saving it up, so that when I come, no collections will have to be made. Then, when I arrive, he says, we'll organise how we send it to you. Now, MPC, if you're a regular here, I don't want to go overboard with the backslapping. It's not a good look. But I reckon as a church we do get this, don't we? And there has been an incredible willingness that's gone back years and years to be incredibly sacrificial, incredibly generous whenever there's been a need. See, I reckon it's incredible when we set out to put aside money together, like he's talking about there in verse 2, and we say, okay, let's see if we can educate 100 kids in the Congo with David and Heather Kelly at $100 a year. Before we know it, we've got money for 167 kids. Now, do you see, that in itself is doing the work of the Lord. The only bit of heavy lifting involved might be lifting the pen to sign the cheque, although for some people that's maybe the heaviest lifting of all, but it is doing the work of the Lord in a wonderful way. Now, Paul says no fuss, no need for fundraisers, just put a bit aside in proportion with what you can afford and get on with it. In Paul's case, with the gift they're sending to Jerusalem, building a bond of love between the very different Jewish Christians and the Gentile Christians that nobody would ever expected, because they're loving one another across huge cultural boundaries, which is exactly what Jesus is about. Now, verse 5 to 9, there's another one. Another way everyone can get involved in the work of the Lord. And that, in their case, is by helping the Apostle Paul on the next leg of his journey, which he hasn't quite got mapped out yet. If you know anything about Paul, he's the first great missionary. He's determined to spread the message of Jesus all over his part of the world. And so through the chapter you keep getting place names: Macedonia, northern Greece. In verse 5, Ephesus, where he's writing from. Verse 8, the whole province of Asia. Verse 19, where churches are sprouting up everywhere. And even though he hasn't figured out yet where he's going to plant churches next, he wants the Corinthians to know they can help him. They'll do that perhaps by providing a bed for him when he stops over. They'll do that by helping with provisions. All kinds of ways that I guess we'd call hospitality. Take a look at verse 6. He says, perhaps I'll stay with you for a while, or even spend the winter wherever I go. Which again is exactly the way it still works for us. Whether it's helping John and Rose Evans on their journey to Japan, Matt and Kerry Viney on their journey to Wavell Heights, doesn't matter where it is. Practical, caring, loving support that says, we are with you in this. Alan Shanks was telling me just the other day, they'd been over to Wavell Heights to the anniversary afternoon, and it was especially to encourage Matt and Kerry. Our financial support as a church, $10,000 this year towards getting the Evans family into Chiba City, doing the work of the Lord by helping to get people into new places in new ways. Or perhaps on the front line like Paul himself. Did you notice his words in verse 8? This may be you too, facing up to opposition as he reaches people with the message of Jesus. That's the work that he's talking about. He says this, verse 8, but I will stay on at Ephesus until Pentecost, because a great door for effective work is opened to me, and there are many who oppose me. Now that's weird, isn't it? But you see, that is the work of the Lord. And instead of stopping because there's a bit of opposition, instead of stopping because it's tough, he says there's a door opening for effective work. Now, if you're a Christian here this morning, I don't know if opposition makes you nervous. It certainly did with Timothy, Paul's young apprentice. It's interesting when Paul writes to Timothy a little bit later, he's got to remind him that God didn't give us a spirit of timidity. He's got to remind Timothy, be bold. And here you'll notice when he's talking about Timothy coming to visit, he says to the Corinthians, you might have to help him a little bit with that. It's in verse 10, and it's worth looking at this from two different angles. Verse 10, take a look. If Timothy comes, see to it that he has nothing to fear while he's with you, for he is carrying on the work of the Lord just as I am. Now, angle number one. Maybe you can help someone else doing the Lord's work to have nothing to fear. Stand with them. Give them a word of encouragement. Spur them on. Timothy, you see, fearful or not, is carrying on the work of the Lord just like Paul is. He's teaching from town to town, building up churches that Paul started. And Paul says to the Corinthians, you can help him. Send him on his way in peace. Help him along. Make sure he's got nothing to fear so he can return to me. Angle number two on this one, maybe you're fearful when it comes to doing the work of the Lord. Did you notice what Pam said in that video about teaching RI in schools? Now, if you've ever done it yourself, you'll know there is nothing more scary than a classroom, particularly of Year 7 boys, I reckon. But Pam went along with Enid, an old lady who's losing her sight. At first, just to hold the books, eased in. See, fear doesn't have to stop you. It doesn't with Pam, didn't with Timothy. And look, it may be you're here today and you're actually someone who needs to think about stepping beyond the fear and getting serious. Maybe even someone who is thinking about full-time ministry like a Paul or a Timothy. Now, remember, a few weeks' time, October 8th, we're running a night called Ministry Pathways. Gary mentioned it before, where we'll talk about that. The ways forward to preparing for that Timothy kind of ministry, whether you're fearful or not. Now, I reckon, you see, we can help you with that, and we can certainly talk about the kind of training and preparation, the pathway that's involved. What about Stephanus and his household, verse 15, the first Christian convert in Achaia, founders of the Church of Corinth? Here's an example. A whole household, a whole family unit committed to serving God's saints. Very much doing the work of the Lord, says Paul. Which makes them, you'll notice, leaders worth following. Submit, says Paul, to the kind of leaders who pour themselves out in service, who labour in the work of the Lord. So I urge you, brothers, verse 15, submit to such as these, and to everyone who joins in the work and labours at it. Now, people like Stephanus might look on the surface like servants. They're people who are always thinking about what's best for somebody else. They might be looking a little bit tired and ragged. I heard someone say yesterday when they're recruiting for leaders in their church, they always look for the ones who volunteer to do the washing up. Paul says people like that, they are the great ones. Stephanus and Fortunatus, Achaicus. Paul says they've just arrived with supplies sent from Corinth, refreshment for Paul's spirit. And maybe that's the way you could get involved in the work of the Lord. Work out ways to refresh the frontliners. Cook a meal sometime for an RI teacher. Surprise them with it. Or a kids' biz leader. Or one of our ministry team. You have been hard at it in the work of the Lord. Let me send you to the movies. Let me take you out to dinner. Amazing how little it takes to refresh a spirit. One more practical tip from Aquila and Priscilla. They send their warm greetings, says Paul in verse 19, and so does the church that meets in their house. How would you like it every week if you had a church meeting in your house? I mean, I guess on the upside it means you don't have to worry about the parking for yourself. You just stay home. But think about it, cleaning up before everyone comes. Hurry up, Aquila, and make the bed. Kids, get those Vegemite crusts off the table. Moving all the chairs, cleaning up afterwards. Now let me tell you, see, that is doing the work of the Lord in 1,000 practical ways. And the 20-something couples here in our church family who open up their homes every week for growth groups know exactly how that feels. Now, if you're keen to get involved that way, if you want a slice of church meeting in your house in 2013, speak to Stu Hoadley after the service and he'll make a note. We'll provide the leaders, you provide the house and the coffee. Or in a similar way, what about those people who work so hard to make you feel at home here in our church building every week? It feels like home, doesn't it? When there's someone else dishing up a cup of tea, someone putting out a cake, someone washing up your cups afterwards. It's hard work. And if you are doing that to encourage your Christian brothers and sisters, if you are doing it to serve like Jesus, if you are doing it because you want to live a cross-shaped, sacrificial life, you're doing way more than just taking your turn on a roster. You are doing the work of the Lord. If you want to get involved in doing the work of the Lord that way, it's a small thing, but contact Jeff Cowles. His details are there. He organises it. It's on the bulletin. See how different this picture is to the model in Corinth we've seen these past 10 weeks or so. In a church where it seems everyone wanted to be the most impressive, where everyone wanted to seem to be the most spiritual, where everyone wanted to be first, where Paul has to say to them, follow my example as I follow Christ. Others first, self last. Following the way of the cross. Living cross-shaped lives of service. Doing the work of the Lord. Friend, if you go home today exhausted because you've worked so hard to serve morning tea afterwards, remember that your labour in the Lord is not in vain. If you're tired here today because you spent the whole day at the Men's Forge conference yesterday, not because you needed it, but because your mate needed it, and you encouraged him by going with him, remember, your labour in the Lord is not in vain. If you're not looking forward to Monday because your RI class has been so tough lately and you're not even sure you want to go 1 p.m. Monday afternoon, remember, your labour in the Lord is not in vain. If you're thinking through how you can maybe be like David and Heather Kelly and use up your retirement savings to serve Jesus overseas, and you're counting the cost, remember, your labour in the Lord is not going to be in vain. If you're ready to step aside from your career that has so defined you to go into some kind of full-time ministry at half the pay, remember, not in vain. You are doing stuff that will potentially last forever. You are touching lives for eternity. You are putting your energy into doing the work of the Lord as we reach and teach and care every day in every way we can. So let me finish by asking, who are you? And what do you do? What are you doing with your life that's going to count like that? That's really going to last, that's really going to make a difference. Are you so consumed by consuming, just working to get more stuff for you, defining yourself just by your day job? Friend, if that is you, and you're bringing that consumer mindset into the kingdom of God, be reminded your mission is, should you choose to accept it, to give yourself fully to the work of the Lord Jesus, who gave himself up fully for you. Therefore, my dear brothers and sisters, stand firm, let nothing move you. Always give yourselves fully to the work of the Lord, because you know that your labour in the Lord is not in vain. Be on your guard. Stand firm in the faith. Be men and women of courage. Be strong. Do everything in love.